Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Cody Fisher, president at Concordance Innovations. They are part of a thriving ecosystem called Surgence, dedicated to strengthening the healthcare supply chain. The mission of Surgence is to fully connect providers, distributors, and suppliers through advanced technology, ensuring medical supplies get where they're needed most. Surgence, the digital platform built by the supply chain for the supply chain, delivers real-time visibility into supply and demand, driving better patient care. Cody is an accomplished professional with a strong background in accounting and finance. He earned his bachelor's degree from Ohio Northern University in 2012 and became a CPA the following year. His experience at Concordance Healthcare Solutions, combined with his current leadership with Surgence, shows his expertise in strategy and operations and pushes healthcare supply chain innovation forward. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. Imagine being able to give your employees free access to doctors, therapists, and prescription medications. And here's the fun part. The program actually puts more money into your employees' pockets. And the companies too. One recent client was able to increase net profits by $900 per employee per year. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, the president of Concordance Innovations and the Surgence platform, Cody Fisher. Thanks for making the time to share your story today.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. I'm excited for the conversation.
All right. So, Cody, every inspiring story has a beginning. What sparked your journey in this industry? And were there moments along the way that made you realize this was your calling?
It's a really fair question to start off. I'll kick off probably by sharing. I'll be transparent and honest as much as I can be throughout the entire conversation. When I started my career, and even from academia, I would not say healthcare was my calling necessarily, or healthcare supply chain to be more specific. What probably added up from academia and then through a couple of my first phases of professional life was delivering value either to internal customers or to that of external customers. And that is ultimately, I think, what was the magnetic force or pull, which got me into my current role today. Not through a linear path, as all can probably imagine, starting in accounting and finance and then saying, hey, you're going to lead a technology organization that's vision is to transform an industry. Not a linear path there, but ultimately the magnetic force was where are there big challenges and how can we deliver value against those challenges? And that ended up in my current role and responsibility, which I'm excited to have. But hopefully that's a weave in and out of, not necessarily a direct answer, but a journey and a little story.
So, and I want to talk, obviously we're going to talk mostly about Surgence and what you guys are doing there today, but maybe first explain what Concordance does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Concordance Healthcare Solutions is a distributor within the healthcare supply chain. So imagine moving anything from Band-Aids and gauze to, higher end medical products and devices from the manufacturers to the providers. And that can be hospitals, that can be non-acute, assisted living, long-term care facilities, physician offices, etc. So that was my calling card before Surgence. Surgence is a part of that organization today within the technology space, within the innovation subsidiary. But there, my responsibility was finance, and I got to do a whole lot of finance leadership internally, but also had the opportunity to represent finance in the organization within the industry in front of customers and suppliers, which led to a lot of strategic relationships, strategic initiatives, and again, kind of transition from that experience and nicely led into what is now Surgence.
So to help our listeners better understand the problem that Surgence is addressing, I think it might be good if you walked us through the problems with the N95 masks during COVID, because I think that
Sure.
was sort of what kicked all this off.
Yeah, it did. And maybe it was the analogy, which probably doesn't all exactly hold true, but it was probably the cherry on top or the icing on the cake type of thing where enough's enough. So, at the core vision of Surgence, it's really to bring organizations in the healthcare supply chain space together on one shared platform so they can better understand themselves and each other in terms of predicting supply of product and the demand of that product. So, Anthony, to your point, referencing N95s or think of any PPE during COVID, whether we were in healthcare or not, we were impacted by it. During COVID, during the pandemic, the manufacturers or the suppliers of N95s were, I'll say, in my opinion, doing the very best they could and making as much as they could. The challenge is, where do I send it? Who needs it most? Who's using it the most? Who has enough inventory? Who doesn't have enough inventory? The suppliers were really running blind and in terms of data, and they, for the most part, had to respond to the emotion of the providers and clinicians and patients, which is incredibly difficult, and vice versa. The providers were ultimately running blind themselves a bit of how much product do I have and how much am I using? How long will that last? But definitely running blind to, when am I getting more? How much am I getting? Where is it coming from? When is it coming? So at the core, that is what Surgence is embarking on doing or is doing already. And we're embarking on enhancing what we're already doing. And for context, it's not just doing it for one or a few products called N95s. It's the millions of products that are spread across the healthcare supply chain that impact our clinicians and patients every day. Well, hopefully that helps in terms of
It
equating
does,
it to the
but
N95s.
yeah, right. So, right. Everybody, unfortunately, we all remember 2020 and beyond and what was going on with COVID, and everybody was trying to get PPE and it was hard to come by. I guess the part that surprises me is that these, large manufacturers didn't understand where they had their inventory. Surely they manufacture it and then they send it to their, call it 5 distribution centers, and they would have like a count of the number of units that
Yep.
are each of their DCs, right?
Yep. It's a really good question. So within the manufacturer suppliers network, I would say they probably had a pretty good idea of what they were producing and what they had in stock. But go outside of their walls, that is where the visibility to what existed essentially shut off. So they knew what they were making, they knew what they had in their walls, but their customers, their distribution partners, etc. That is where the visibility to how much inventory exists, how much is being used, how long is that inventory going to last, who needs it most in terms of the thousands of providers across the United States. That is where their challenge really started.
Okay. So, but let me ask this then. Let's say, I've made these N95 masks and I ship some to ABC Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Once I've shipped them to ABC Hospital, they belong to ABC Hospital. Like, it's
I
not
do.
sort of like within my benefits or even like it's not my data to know like how many of those units that they've consumed, right? Am I thinking about
That's
this
right.
correctly or no?
You are. You are. Once the product crosses that ownership line, for the most part, it disappears. Now, as partners, even pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, organizations that were very, very aligned, and I'll use the word strategic, although it gets thrown around in industry a lot. the organizations that were strategic in their relationship, they might have been sharing some data, right? Like, okay, that provider, as an example, may send snapshots of data to the supplier to say, this is how much I have or how long it's going to last, et cetera. It wasn't, if it was happening, it wasn't scalable, and it surely wasn't happening enough across the supplier and provider community. But you're spot on. I mean, once an organization buys product, it is theirs, not just the physical product itself, but the data that correlates to that product. And that is,
and so
again,
as maybe the administrator of the ABC hospital, where I now have 10,000 of your N95 masks, what would be the advantage for me, the ABC hospital, to share that data back to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So during the pandemic, the perception was not much of an advantage, right?
Okay.
If I share that data, it's going to be used against me. If I have 10,000, I'm not getting my next order until I have 0 because somebody else in the country has 0. Fast forward to, post-pandemic or current state, the value of sharing data is incredibly high. Because as much as almost every organization, not just providers, we're trying to buy and inventory as much, not only of N95s, but of PPE in general, as they could in order to protect, if you're a provider, your clinicians and patients. If you're a distributor, protect your providers so you can support them in what they need and kind of build up the supply chain from there. Almost every organization ended up with too much as well. And a lot of that too much was rooted in, it was really difficult to know how much an organization was using, how much they needed, how much they were going to forecast that they needed. So fast forward to kind of current state, our position is, by sharing data, organizations now are not operating in operational silos. They're operating together, which is actually how the supply chain works to start with. Like, product isn't just made out of thin air and sent somewhere. It's made for demand. It's made to move to the organizations that have demand. And all the way down to the clinician and patient, the demand still exists. Hospitals are buying product because there's demand to protect clinicians or to protect and provide care. So our again vision or statement that although the industry is not necessarily rooted in high trust and confidence of sharing data, the value on the other side of that bridge of being a bit more visible, not only internally to organizations, but also with your partners, is incredibly valuable. And that use case isn't just, hey, do we know supply and demand? It's, how do you manage inventory? How do you order product? Do you even have my items set up correctly? Is pricing set up correctly? The list can go on and on of where visibility can stem or advance to, but it really is rooted in trust. And are we aligned in our goals, and are we aligned in our joint mission, if you will, when we just talk about partnering organizations?
So as the administrator at ABC Hospital, sharing that inventory data might have the following advantages. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. It helps the manufacturers I'm buying from know if I'm going to need inventory soon, right? So that they, as the manufacturer, they can forecast, their manufacturing planning operation. It can let my suppliers know if I've got pricing set up incorrectly, or maybe I've got it somehow coded wrong, if I've got product descriptions in there wrong, and they can flag that and come back to me and say, hey, we need to provide you with some updates there. Yes. And what else?
Yes. And the general term I would put on top of that is, not only does providing visibility help organizations start on a strong foundation, it allows organizations to operate their supply chains most efficiently together as well. So how they order, when we're replenishing, what the right level of inventory is, when to be more resilient and increase stock, and when to be less resilient and optimize to decrease stock. And ultimately, where we see organizations end up is not only are they better operating their supply chains together, but they're predicting their supply chains together. So they're more advanced in looking forward of where is their risk, whether that be on the, outside of pain here, whether that be on the upstream side of raw materials and manufacturing and production and shipping, or the downstream side of, hospitals standing up a new facility, or they're launching a new type of surgery or domain, and they expect to see a 20% increase in patients, right? That's not a conversation that should be had. That should be transformed from a conversation to data. So we see
So I don't have to
organizations
get on the
being able
phone.
to
I
be
don't have to
proactive.
shoot out an email. The system is sort of proactively communicating that information to my supply
It
chain.
is the conduit in which it's communicated. Yes.
It's the conduit. So it sounds like you guys have sort of taken everybody's inventory tracking systems, gotten them to talk to each other, created these centralized dashboards where the right people can look at the right data at the right time. But I think you guys have taken it a step further, and maybe this is what you were just sort of touching on, because I think it also helps with decision making. Like it
does.
guides you through the process. It's not just giving you the data so that you can look at it and say, okay, I think we need 100 units this month instead of 125 like we had last month. It's getting more involved. Can you describe that?
It is. Yes. You are correct in that it's helping organizations, even within their own network, bring disparate technologies together, call it through the single pane of glass. It's doing the same then for providers and their partners, or suppliers and their partners and providers. And yes, it brings that to visibility, call it the dashboard, right? But ultimately, we're also translating that dashboard then into decisions based on the rules and the strategies set by a single organization and their partners. So imagine a world where, just say ABC, that ABC hospital is an example, has an inventory strategy in which they share how many days on hand they want to carry in a certain area. That can come from a myriad of different technologies at a source level, but we will integrate those sources of data. We will bring that to not only the provider, but also their supplier partner, if they would like it to be visible to them. And now collaboratively, those two organizations are ensuring that they're executing on the strategy they set. And if they're not, they're given the insights and alerts. So they actually do not have to go to a dashboard. They're looking at an alert that's telling them you're not executing based on the rules and strategy you put in place. Here's what you need to do to get back to the rule. If you don't want to get back to the rule, there's also then incremental workflows and approvals to go off the rule. But we're really enabling organizations, I would argue, not only to execute more effectively and efficiently, we're ultimately tying their strategy to execution, which is really, really difficult when you're running an organization on numerous technologies, let alone then how do you share that data and information with your supply chain partners as well.
Yeah. Interesting. And is this focused exclusively on healthcare supply chain?
Today it is healthcare supply chain, and call them channels or segments or markets. It is consumables. It is devices, implants. We have the ability to go into lab, pharma, etc. So we're not limited on what types of products, but our focus is healthcare supply chain. There is plenty of work to do in the space. And I don't mean that to say that work's not being done collectively by the industry, but the opportunity is there. And truthfully, and this is my opinion, the industry has never needed to innovate more than today, given financial pressures, given the changing dynamics and how patient care and funding works in general, but then that ripple effect all the way back upstream in the supply chain and manufacturing and product production. The industry, I believe, is going to experience the need and necessity for a lot of change. And we're happy to be on the ride. There's where there's change and where there's
What's going to
challenge, there's a
drive
lot of
that
opportunity.
need, Cody? What do you think is going to drive that need?
I think it's two pieces. One, it will pull from my background and thread of I believe there's going to be more financial pressure than the industry's ever felt, given how care is reimbursed and the funding mechanisms of patient care. I think that's one thread. The other thread is also the industry cannot over deliver on value, because I think it can become too optimized. And in our industry, we cannot bring undue risk given the patient is at the end of the product delivery. We aren't, if the healthcare supply chain overall doesn't deliver, it doesn't mean we didn't deliver vehicles. It doesn't mean we didn't deliver iPhones or, something we use in our personal life. It means we didn't deliver care to a patient that has a much higher magnitude of risk on the other end of not delivering that product. So, the two main pillars for me that Surgent, for myself and that Surgence is really pushing to address is that of bring value, but also bring resiliency, and that management of how do we help organizations balance both of those levers, whatever the risk profile is. All organizations are a bit different. But we want to be the mechanism in which they can balance that financial driver and the resiliency risk driver simultaneously.
Cody, I've been through a lot of different tech implementations in the past. And in my experience, the tools only work if people use them and if you get the data into them. What have you found are the biggest hurdles in getting people to adopt Surgence technology?
It's a good question. I think the easiest hurdle, there's a couple. I'll start with the easiest maybe to talk about. The easiest hurdle is simply that of change. I think as people, typically, we don't like change. Some folks really gravitate to it, but I think the common theme is as people, as humans, we kind of hit our stride and we get comfortable, right? With this is my day, this is my work, this is how I do it. I do it really, really well. It's what I'm paid to do. And even personally, same thing, right? We hit our stride as families and friends, and hey, it's the Sunday dinners, or it's once a month I meet so and so. Like we kind of hit our stride in our routine. So change at its core is one of the challenges, but to take it even maybe a step or two further, new technology is a challenge, generally speaking, and we have to find the balance of how far can the technology go versus, to your point, Anthony, like how far is the user today willing to go? We try to find that balance. So my example is our technology can automate an entire process and not have a human make a decision. The adoption of that is incredibly unlikely because the human's making every decision and hand holding a piece of data through the process today. So to go from I control every step as a person, literally probably in Excel files, to I may not even have to click a button and something's happening, that's too big a gap, right? So we find that kind of what is that magic like bridge to bring
how
automation.
Can you sort of get them to take incremental steps?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So that's part of it, or part of the next step. The other part is ultimately ensuring that we are solving the problems that are most valued by the industry or an individual customer. So one of those challenges of delivering that value or solving that challenge and the problem is even within an organization, the persona of, let's say, the challenge a leader may have is not the challenge that a person buying product has. They may be connected, but they may also not be the same. So our challenge in delivering technology is depending on the application or the workflow or the very specific thing we're solving. We have to determine, are we solving it for the person doing the work? Are we solving it for the person leading the work or building the strategy? And we have to be flexible enough that those things may be different. They might be two different applications. They might be two different views of the same application. And they definitely could be two different workflows.
So this strikes me as a platform where the more people that are using it, the more useful it is, right?
Hmm.
If you've got one factory, but none of their distribution partners and none of their end customers using it, it's not quite as effective. What have you guys tried and found success with when it comes to sort of reaching a scale? Like, what's been good for you guys in terms of growth?
Yep. We're absolutely on that journey today. The most effective way that we are scaling or finding that how do we help organizations maximize the value beyond their own walls is to really address the challenges that not only impact a provider or a distributor or supplier. So to find those challenges that have multifaceted values, and while a provider may say, yes, this is a huge challenge for me, so does a supplier. So go back to the N95 example. It is a challenge for both the provider and the supplier community to say what's happening with X product, an N95 as an example. Those values are a bit different. A provider wants to know where it's at so it ensures it doesn't run out. The supplier wants to know where it's at so it can ensure it delivers it on time and where it's needed the most, but both rooted in the challenge of where is the product, right? So that's just an easy general example. So we find those challenges that exist that may have different lenses, different personas, different ways to address the challenge based on what segment or what hat you wear, but there's value in the multi-segment approach. And that ultimately, where there's finance hat here for me, where there's value, there's priority, and where there's priority, there's capacity.
Let's talk about the value piece. I mean, I'm wrapping my head around this, and I can see how this would be incredibly helpful. But I think it would be useful if we just kind of like bullet pointed, like here are the top outcomes that we expect the Surgence platform to deliver.
Yeah, it's really fair. I'll hit a couple. There's too many probably just to list off, but let's say it is to ensure product is where it's needed the most to deliver patient care. That is a mutual value prop that every segment of the supply chain, it is their number one priority. If it's not their priority, they're not in business, essentially. The second piece of that is how do I ensure that product is there, but in the most optimal fashion, meaning the combination of how do I help either myself manage inventory or my partners manage inventory, and how do I ensure we're doing optimal ordering strategies. So the product it needs to be there to take care of patients. Secondarily, how much needs to be there and when does it need to be there, and how do we order and or ship against that demand? And then we start breaking it down into the spokes of, are organizations buying or selling the right product at the right time? Are they buying alternative product? Do they need to buy alternative product? So it starts to spoke out into this multifaceted value statement in which suppliers want to make sure their product is known to be available, regardless if it's a primary or a substitute. And the providers have to know if the primary product is available, and if not, are there substitutes available to, again, reinforce bullet one and bullet two. Do I have enough product, and is it where it needs to be to take care of my patients?
So the patient impact is obviously a huge part of this, right? You don't want to risk people's healths or their lives by not having the right products in the right place at the right time. The business case seems to me like this is all about giant cost savings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what inventory management comes down to. If I am carrying too many of the wrong things, that is cash sitting on the shelves, not doing anybody any good, not doing my business any good. And if I need something and I don't have enough of it, that's also money being lost, right? There's a lost sale opportunity there. That's really what this distills down into.
Yes, it is. Point one would be to ensure providers are enabled to take care of their clinicians and patients. and point two would be in the most financially optimal way possible.
Yeah.
Where today the industry is doing point one. Like, frankly, kudos to the industry, because I don't know how the industry doesn't not do what happens in other industries where it's like, oops, we don't have enough chips or a raw material or whatever it is, and we go months without seeing a product. That product in healthcare is care.
Mm.
The industry moves heaven and earth to ensure it doesn't impact clinicians and patients. Moving heaven and earth takes a lot of money, to your point, Anthony, right? So it is, don't lose sight of point one, but do point two way better is ultimately the goal.
Well, and, like you said, there, what's going to drive a lot of this need is the cost of care just keep going up. Everything is becoming more expensive, and your solution, the Surgence platform, is a way to help reduce costs. And it's something we never hear about when it comes to healthcare now, right? Yeah. Everything is going up. This is a way to help rein in some of those expenses.
Yes. Everything's going up except how much providers charge for care, which is going down. So it's the ultimate, like,
imbalance.
Yes.
It's an imbalance.
It's incredibly tricky.
Getting worse.
Expenses are increasing more than ever. And call it revenue is being pressured more than ever.
What's the ultimate goal for Surgence? Where do you see this going in the next few years?
The ultimate goal is to enable the industry to truly operate, and almost think of it as the industry operating system or the industry platform. That's the ultimate goal. If you want to scale, you can integrate your data, and all of a sudden, if your provider partners agree as a supplier, you should see the product. A light switch goes on, you get to see all your product inside your end user customers. Vice versa. Your provider that integrates to Surgence, and now all of a sudden you get to see, what's my supply forecast look like? Do I have any risk in the product I buy? You can see it by light switch, not 100 custom APIs to individual partners that are taking massive use from an IT team or sophisticated engineers. That's ultimately the vision. I would put a vision in front of that. In the next 3 years, if we can show the industry that change isn't that scary and there's a lot of value on the other side of change, I would call that a win. Even before we say, oh, the whole industry is on one platform or a few platforms. I think there's some really big win steps for the industry in front of that, and for Surgence in front of that vision.
Is Surgence the first one to think about solving the problem in this way? Like, is this the first sort of centralized platform?
I don't think we're the first one to think about a centralized platform.
What are you guys doing differently or better then?
Yeah, I think we're the first organization to think about the centralized platform in the operational sense of the supply chain. There's a lot of incredible platforms out there that help organizations order and transact digitally, things of that nature. But there's not a lot of platforms or, any platforms that help organizations come together and say, how do you manage product? How do you manage your inventory together? Not as an organization, but together. How do you manage how you order and optimize how you order and deliver product together? So the operational lens for us, and, in the intro, Anthony, you had mentioned, built by the supply chain for the supply chain. When you're from the supply chain, you know how it works and you know where the ghosts are at and the skeletons are at in the closet. Yeah. You know what is difficult day to day, and it shouldn't be that difficult. You know where organizations can easily get out of alignment on simple stuff. And, although our vision is big, and yes, we have some really sophisticated algorithms on some of our applications and workflows, most of our stuff is really about digitizing and optimizing the most simple processes in the supply chain and bringing organizations together to be more simple versus more complex. So some extra color there on the vision. The vision is big, our vision is big, but there's some milestones in front of that are very much attainable, and they will be incredibly valuable to the industry.
And we hit upon this a couple of times, like that change management process seems like it's probably one of your biggest hurdles to overcome.
Yeah.
How do you think about sort of building those incremental movements to, so people are comfortable? Like you said, they're accustomed to holding on to every step of the process. You can't take them from there to absolutely no involvement.
Yep.
So how do you sort of think about walking them through this before they run?
I'll start by being a bit audacious, and then I'll be a bit more practical. So the audacious answer is develop use cases and value by showing it and proving it that organizations can't deny. So the value of not changing, or the value of changing, far surpasses the pain of not changing. I'll put it that way. That's the audacious answer, is show off what organizations are doing to the industry. And it's oh my gosh, this is a no-brainer. It really doesn't matter how painful it is. The pain of not doing something is far surpassing the pain of change. And I can extend on that comment a little bit that I've made a few times in public settings within the industry. But the practical side maybe isn't too much different, just different words, is really, leveraging those use cases that organizations are executing today and helping the industry understand how that use case pertains to them. It is not easy to be an organization, probably in general, but in healthcare supply chain today. Even leading a technology company, I probably get 100 emails a day about how another technology company can help my technology company. So, call it automation, AI, et cetera. Individually, we are being exposed and marketed to in general in such a high level that I think part of the challenge is it's really hard for people, let alone organizations, to sift through like which of these solutions, which of these innovative things matter to me the most. So if I go full circle back to we're very practical within our organization. We try to simplify where we can instead of be incredibly complex and high tech. The practical side of our approach is be operational in nature, prove the value, show that value, share the value, allow organizations to understand why, integrating and kind of building across that bridge, if you will, of I should share more data and more data will be shared with me and what's on the other side of that. Again, I made the comment earlier, by starting with value, it helps organizations understand how it relates to them. It helps them prioritize that they need to do something in a given space. And if the priority is high enough, they will figure out, or we can help them figure out how to address the capacity. Because that is also a challenge for change. Do you have capacity to change? Do you have resources? Do you have the extra time to devote to innovate versus just figure out how to operate your supply chain?
So you were on the finance side of things before with Concordance. You got tapped on the shoulder to lead this new venture with Surgence. You've got a team there at Surgence. You had a team at Concordance that you were leading. What are some core beliefs that have guided your leadership style and the way that you make decisions?
It's fair. One of my beliefs, not that I say this a lot in words, but it's probably core. Regardless of title, we're all in it for the same reason. That's what I want to believe. That's what I hope is echoed through my leadership style. There's meetings where we throw titles out the door, but really how we operate day to day in Surgence, we throw titles out the door. That doesn't mean we throw the responsibilities out the door necessarily, but when we're in a room figuring out a problem, you may not be able to tell the difference between an engineer and a finance person or the leader and customer success. We're all in it for the same reason, to figure out the problem, to develop a solution, to bring value. So kind of building that team approach where, yes, there's seats on a bus. Yes, there's people in those seats, but ultimately the bus is headed in a direction. And if the bus doesn't get there, none of us get there. That's one part of probably core to me. The other part
everybody has
is
a voice.
Everyone has a voice. Yep.
Yeah.
And everybody has an expertise and everybody has a perspective. And the more perspective we can get, ideally, the better solution and value we can present and deliver. The other piece that is probably core to who I am is to be vulnerable. At the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all people. We all have lives. We all have family. We all have friends. We have a lot going on, and not all the time is that all work, even though when we're, behind our current day laptop screens on Teams meetings or else, it feels like it's the only thing at times. But, I think it's important to really get to know and understand who we are as a team. A team is made up of people that have individual lives, and they are people and individuals themselves. And ultimately, I would say the last thing that, maybe I try to show and embody is attracting people and teams that also want to solve the hardest problems and challenges to deliver the most difficult value. I feel like when teams are grounded in a centralized cause and they're passionate about that cause, it's really hard to get moved too far off track. Like, yes, we hit hurdles, yes, we hit roadblocks, but collectively, when we're aligned on the goal, the team figures out a way to get around or over or through whatever hurdle comes up. So those are a few things.
How do you think about constructing that team? How do you put that team together? How do you identify those traits in people?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it's probably less technical in nature. I probably have a pretty firm belief that we can teach a lot of technical skills, interpersonal skills, etc. But what makes a person tick is not necessarily teachable. So that combination of, just find people with the aligned passion, pull it out of them to really understand who they are and what they're passionate about. Doesn't have to necessarily be healthcare supply chain, but it may be, I want to position organizations or help position organizations to save a lot of money. It may be the other end. I want to position organizations to take care of my family. So it doesn't have to be like word for word the same, but people that are aligned on addressing big problems, big challenges, and delivering big value is part of it. The other part of that for me, in terms of like, how do we build the team? And this is absolutely in flight for Surgence as we continue to grow. It is to organically attract people. I will say, roughly speaking, half of our team has come to us. We didn't go to them. So
half of the Surgence team, which is a relatively newer company. Okay.
Yeah, newer company. Yep. We are getting asked by the industry or people within the industry, can I come work for you? And I think that is representative of kind of us walking in our beliefs, right? Walking in our mission, being proud of what we're doing, but also being incredibly mindful of just how significant it is for the industry. And, it's kind of hard not to want to play for a really awesome and cool team that's solving big problems. So, again, it's not an exact answer, but I think when you have a team that represents what you want your team to be and what you want to represent in an organization, you kind of attract the talent you want. And in some ways you deflect the talent you don't want. I mean, people probably also see us and like, oh, I don't want to. That's hard. That's complex.
A big lift.
Yeah. They seem like they're, there's nights where they're up late. They're kind of weird and quirky. They don't fit the mold of like healthcare or supply chain. So, and that's okay. Like, I appreciate that. We're proud that we're a bit different and, we address things a different way, but
how are you different? How are you guys quirky?
Personally, I would say, we're probably more open than most companies. Probably share things at a personal level, right? I mean, there's probably meetings where you're like, "Wait, are you guys coworkers or friends?" I don't know which. Is this Saturday at a football game or is this Wednesday at work? The quirkiness is is maybe a bit extended, but I think the culture that we are building is unique in nature. It's frankly like at times a bit chaotic, and I think that kind of fits the mold a bit for a startup, but startup mentality does not fit the mold for healthcare supply chain. That is a kind of a two ends of the spectrum a little bit, right? And when we're bringing a little bit of that mold into the supply chain, there's a lot of friends and there's a lot of like, oh, like, let me see how that works.
Okay.
So yeah, and we come from a lot of different walks of life, right? We have people from an engineering background that are pretty fresh and new, and they're coming in chomping at the bit, trying to solve the biggest problems, to build the next best thing, to leverage AI to do crazy stuff. We have folks that are rooted in the supply chain, and they're like, we need to fix it this way. This is how it works. And when you blend those things together and kind of throw them in the proverbial blender, it's pretty cool to see what spits out.
Mm. You talk about how you guys are maybe a bit more open than a lot of employment environments. And I guess in that spirit of openness, I'd like to ask you, Cody, to share a serious challenge that you've overcome in your life, how you got through it, what you learned.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I was almost ready to say I'm a little bit sorry that I don't have a massive challenge to share, but as much like actually I think I should be thankful I don't have that massive life challenge experience to share. But what I will share that's a current natural challenge for me is not only do I have the honor of leading a technology startup in the healthcare supply chain that has this massive vision and is looking to deliver this incredible value, but in personal life, I'm also leading a growing family. Got a 9-month-old, and probably a growing family coming behind it, I'm sure. And really, personally, I've always struggled with finding quote unquote that work-life balance. I've for sure leaned heavy in the professional space. As I got married, that softened a little bit, and then probably softened a little bit more. Or at minimum is something I had to be a lot more mindful of as my personal family has grown. So those sacrifices of, the jump on a plane and go to a customer tomorrow on a whim, that sacrifice was not that big a handful of years ago. And today it's big. That extra time matters. Whether, at conferences, I probably pinch the last night to go home versus, oh, let's stay an extra day to do a hike. Right. So like the mindset shift for me is still something, transparently I'm working on. I'm not sure. I've heard some other leaders say this, that we're in startups and are not startups anymore. They're massive organizations. But I've heard them talk about the work-life balance where it's not necessarily a balance. I think Jeff Bezos said it a little bit. That was one reference point. Like, it's not a balance as a teeter-totter, like, well, you're working or you're not, or you're professional or you're not. It's more like a circle, and the circle has to somehow stay aligned. And it's more of, if professional's going well and you feel comfortable in whatever effort and time and capacity you're putting toward professional, it's more likely that personal also is going well. So it's more of finding the kind of the circle and making sure it's not too misaligned. And where I'm focused today is, this is a strength I'm building, a muscle I'm building, is if I have the professional hat on, it's all the way on. And if I have the personal hat on, it's all the way on. That's my new focus. It may not be the time that I want in either space. It may not be the sacrifice I want to make in either space, but when I'm in the space, I'm in the space, whether that's personal or professional. So hopefully that gives a little bit of color.
I think that one's critical. Yeah, I'm glad that you gave voice to that, because it's exactly where my head was going as I hear you sort of wrestling and talking about the teeter-totter. Sometimes your life needs to go very heavily in one direction or the other, right? You've got a new launch. You have to, say to your wife, listen, I'm sorry, I'm going to be relatively unavailable for X number of days or weeks. And then when you're with your family, right, you want to be fully locked in there too. It may not be like a critical event. It may not be somebody's ill, but you're with your kid, you're with your wife. you don't want to be clanking away on the keyboard like,
Yep.
yes, dear. Yeah. You're not
Answering the
doing,
emails at the kitchen table.
yeah, you're not going to be as effective answering those emails and coming up with work strategy when, you've got one ear over
Exactly.
here, and you're certainly not giving your family the best either. Right.
Yep. 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 So again, I mean, again, from mentors, friends, acquaintances in the industry, I know of many of those. Oh my gosh, life moments. And oh my gosh, how did somebody pull out of that moment? I'm fortunate not to have at least top of mind any of those. But I think we can all relate to, hopefully, a little bit of kind of what I shared. I mean, it's absolutely what I'm going through now. Um, and it's not easy to sacrifice either time, right? The highly momentous, highly valuable, highly driven organization, or the highly valuable personal family and time. So that's where I'm at.
I think you and I are probably wired pretty similarly, Cody. And, we're really driven by this desire to create, to solve hard problems, to do the next big thing. And it can be really tough to balance that with, I love my wife, I love my kids, I love my family, I want to be there for them. And how do I kind of keep a foot in both of those worlds? And, and I'm sure you've heard this before. I'm sure most listeners have heard this before. Something I keep playing over in my head is, this idea that, nobody lays on their deathbed and says, oh man, I wish I would have worked a little bit longer. Right.
Yeah.
The regrets typically come down to, man, I wish I was there for more of my kids' games or my grandkids or, whatever it is. It's more of that personal stuff. And so and I see you nodding your head. I think you get it. You agree. You're having that argument in your head all the time of, how do I keep reaching, striving, building, creating, solving, doing hard things, without creating that regret that I'm going to have eventually, that I might have eventually someday.
Yep. All I'll say in response to that is not only am I blessed to lead the organization, to have an incredible family, but I'm blessed to have a team around me professionally that pushes me to do exactly what you just said. So when I can't hold myself accountable, I have a team around me that holds myself accountable, not just professionally, but to say, hey, get out of here and go focus on family for the next hour, the next day, tonight, whatever it may be. So I am blessed to have that team surrounding me professionally that kind of urges me to go that way and simultaneously ensures the trajectory of the business, what we're doing for our customers, lives on without a blip.
So Cody, I'm going to ask you to set aside all your humility, and I want you to explain to the listeners what your superpower is.
Superpower for me, I think my superpower would be, I'm not sure what to name it, but I'll give an example, maybe, is to be able to sit in a conversation, one-on-one or in a meeting, several people, and to hear a conversation around a problem, a challenge, a what might this look like type of conversation, and to be able to visualize what that solution is and then articulate the value to it. So if I repeat that back, I guess in a simple non-example term, it's to be able to creatively design solutions essentially on the fly. And then I'll say to leverage both sides of my brain, the finance side, articulate the value of said solution, and the kind of the relationship side to articulate it in a way in which somebody else can relate to. Call it connecting the dots. In short, I think that's one of my superpowers. And, maybe my other superpower, I've had a couple of customers tell me this before, that you think like finance, but talk like sales. So maybe that's another analogy or another way to describe it, but yeah.
That's a good combo of skills to have. You can talk to both
Yeah.
sides of the world. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually had
Any,
someone on our team lead a superpower session where we named our superpowers for all our team. And mine was
and did most
something
people
like,
describe your superpower in the same way that you did for yourself just now?
yeah, it was under the guise, I think, as I was talking, I'm like, there's something, it was called something. It was visionary virtuoso was the way the superpower is described.
Okay.
I gave more words to it, articulating the value and connecting the dots to create a solution out of a problem. But yeah, it was for all the listeners. And I know we'll probably get to this later, but it was a great exercise. I will tell you almost to a T, the superpower exercise absolutely described everyone's superpower on our team. Like, we were shocked. Like, as we did leverage AI, of course, in some way, shape, or form. But the superhuman or superpower character that was describing each person on our team, everyone's basically like, yep, that's great. That's what you do. It's what you do really well. So it was a great exercise for anybody that's interested.
So I think you want to say more about that because you said, I think we'll probably get to this later. Let's not do it later. Let's do it now. What more do you want to say about that process?
Yeah. I mean, as far as reaching out to me, again, I'm not the expert that came up with that activity, but reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect the dots. It was a great team building exercise. It was unique in nature.
Is it something that you guys did, like you created this internally, or did you use somebody else's framework?
No, it was all internal. We leveraged the powers of some AI and just put in like simple inputs about some of our leadership team and some of our team in general, and asked it to do some prompts and basically asked us to deliver it back, like what our superpower is, and build a character for us. It's wild. It was and to this day, and this was the better part of a year or so ago, to this day, there are times where we refer to each other as like the superhuman or Superman or Superwoman character, or the actual like superpower that a given person's using like in day to day. So it's again,
Was
it's
this
good
a
for team
helpful
building.
process just because it was interesting? Was it helpful because it helps to boost each individual's confidence about what they're really good at? Was it helpful because it helped to tell all the other team members where that person's strengths and values lie? Or something else?
It was several of those. It was meant to be a team building exercise, an icebreaker, if you will. That turned then into what makes us as individuals tick, to then the team getting to know more about us as individuals beyond what we would say about ourselves. Because typically, like you asked me my superpower, typically people don't answer because it's really uncomfortable to brag about yourself, right? So it ended up taking this like next layer down where it's like, oh wow, this is the superpower for that person, and we also just confirmed it's really what they're passionate about. So when we have this type of situation, like, we now collectively know this person is the person that needs to address that situation. That is their superpower. Or we can see people like using their superpower, and then we can call it out and reconfirm, like, look how great you're doing, So it is, it literally went from an icebreaker exercise to now it is rooted in some of our culture as a team, of how we talk to each other, how we communicate, what we know about each other, and when to invoke or to incite the superpower from some of the people. So it just was interesting. And I guess that's probably why it popped in my head of, mini use case, icebreaker. How many icebreakers are we a part of when we're sitting around tables and new meetings, etc.? How many of those do we remember is my general question. This one was not only remembered, it was used and leveraged continuously. throughout our team.
Sounds like it's a bit more effective than asking if you were a fruit, what kind of fruit would you be, right? So this is much more informative and constructive.
So,
Cody, I've just got one more
it's
question.
Nothing more than something small, but go ahead.
Yeah, I like that. Just one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to knock out a few things. And you touched on this already for the first one. To get in touch with Cody Fisher, you can find him on LinkedIn. We'll include a link in the show notes, but you can also search for Cody Fisher in Surgence or Concordance, and you'll find his profile come up. And as a reminder, if you want to get more employees access to benefits that won't hurt them financially and carries a financial upside for the company, reach out to addbackbenefits.com. And finally, if you take just a moment to leave us a comment or review on your favorite podcast app, we'll be forever grateful to you. So last question for you, Cody. You and I reconnect a year from now, and you're super excited. You're fist pumping in the air. You're celebrating something big. What's that big thing you hope to be celebrating 1 year from today?
I'll answer both two ways. Professionally, success to me would not only be to say, here's the 5 easy examples of how Surgence has delivered value to the industry and how the industry is changing. We have some of those today. Maybe not that simple. Mine's probably a bit more generic, which would be to show the growth of a Surgence organization, which ultimately would mean that the growth of innovation in the supply chain is happening. So instead of 20 people, say it's 40, 50 people. To double our organization means inevitably the industry is innovating at a much faster pace. So the number of use cases, the number of value statements is very important to me from a tactical perspective, but from a strategic perspective, it's more about building the momentum and increasing that momentum in the industry. Personally, in a year, I would love to say, have a thriving family, but maybe to take it tactical is to say I figured out that balance thing. To figure it out, I figured it out.
You cracked the code, huh?
I cracked the code. Anybody that wants to figure this out, come talk to me. No, but truthfully, just being in probably a little bit more of a kind of finding that routine, as much as I'm against the routine and always pushing for change, but to finding that, that kind of harmony, if you will, between what is the growing organization and, the time I devote to that, and what is the growing family and the time I try to find that better harmony between those.
I like that. Good goals. Cody Fisher from Surgence, I want to be the first to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. That was great.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.